God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him, you and I!
Look upon me and despair.
These are the words of German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche in his 1882 work, The Gay Science. In aphorism 125, Nietzsche has a madman say these words. But what could a madman know? What is he trying to tell us through rambunctious ramblings? Obviously, the belief in a god is still alive, both during Nietzsche's time and today. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three primary monotheistic religions of the West, continue to exist with literally billions of adherents. So how exactly could God not only be dead, but also a murder victim? This all depends on what one means by God. The monotheistic God of Christianity and Islam is the uncreated creator, the unmoved first mover. This God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. An OMNI-GOD. God is not just the ultimate cause, but also the ultimate goal.
Let's just say he gets around.
He is the ens perfectum, the ultimate good. So one's distance from God correlates to their own individual goodness, or lack thereof. God is the ultimate value, from which all other values spring from. And unlike those pesky, contingent, worldly values, God's values are eternally true, aeternitas veritas. God is the nunc stans, the abiding and remaining, that can always be referred to, or used as the ground for deeds and thoughts.
So if God is this freaking amazing, how could he be murdered? By mere mortals at that!
Nietzsche himself was an avowed atheist, only increasing the confusion of stating a deity you don't believe in is dead. For Nietzsche, the death of the Christian OMNI-GOD marks the creation of a new type of nihilism, or a villing towards nothingness. This is a villing towards the nihil, the nothing, a type of villing and believing which is profoundly anti-life.
Nihilism is anti-life because it doesn't affirm life. And the most fundamental aspect of life for Nietzsche is the will to power, Wille zur Macht.
In his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, Zarathustra says, quote,
"Only where there is life is there also will.
Not will to life, but
Thus I teach you, will to power, power, power."
Nihilism perpetrates an end for humanity, either in this life or another. There's nothing left to do, nothing else to create. There is only a reactive, sullen life to live. This is the antithesis of the will to power. The will to power always wants more to will, to surpass itself continuously. If something does not will, it's not alive. And it's this resistance to not willing that makes nihilism possible. For the will would rather will nothing than not will at all.
To be clear, Nietzsche isn't advocating the reincarnation of God as the supreme value.
Been there, done that.
Christianity teaches us to suppress our inner desires, the impure material world, in favor of an eternally divine afterlife.
One which we have no access to while alive, and therefore cannot prove its existence.
Christianity is just a different form of nihilism, where believers will their existence towards a nothingness. God, the afterlife, values above and beyond life.
Religion devalues life, depreciates life, in the name of higher values. The nihilism that comes from religion is specifically to prevent the type of nihilism that comes from modernity.
Quote, "It is the profound, suspicious fear of an incurable pessimism that forces whole millennia to bury their teeth in and cling to a religious interpretation of existence."
Now that God is dead, the madman says,
Those who are born after belong to a higher history than any history hitherto.
It's worth noting that the Madman's audience is not a crowd of religious zealots, but mainly a crowd of atheists and non-believers. Nietzsche says, quote, "As there were many people who did not believe in God, the Madman caused a great deal of amusement."
These people long ago forsook God, whether by conquering the circumference of the planet or detaching the sun and earth from the center of the universe. The Madman is addressing modernity, the Enlightenment. It is for this reason that the Madman's listeners laugh at him and express confusion.
The God referred to is not an entity of any kind, described above as an omni-God, not an actual being, but is precisely a value created by humanity. God was the ultimate omni-value that was both the alpha, means, and omega, ends of all things.
The Madman states that even though this deed is done, it has yet, quote,
reach men's ears. Deeds need time, even after they are done, to be seen and heard. This deed is as yet further from them than the furthest star, and yet they have done it.
We should point out that many of the primary figures of the early Enlightenment were all deeply religious and strongly believed in God. Thinkers like Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, René Descartes, John Locke, Bishop George Berkeley, Gottfried Leibniz, etc. all thought their discoveries were ultimately created by an omni-God, and they were using a methodology given to them by God specifically to understand his universe.
Yet their methodology was a seismic shift away from Catholic scholasticism of the medieval period, where the authority and existence of God was proven merely on belief and obedience. With thinkers like Bacon and Descartes, proof of God's value could be proven by any individual, through reason and intuition alone, through one's own faculties. The latter, Descartes, relied on the authority of the intellect, while the former, Bacon, relied on the authority of the senses. Either way, the world is knowable. Its mysteries can be discovered. We no longer need to rely on church dogma to explain the unknown. We now have our own lanterns to light the way.
Yet, by the 18th and 19th century, this critical methodology had led many Enlightenment figures to increasingly secular philosophies like deism, the belief in an uncaring and or uninvolved deity, thinkers like Voltaire, Diderot, and many of the American founding fathers, or just straight-up atheism, the belief there is no deity, thinkers like David Hume, Arthur Schopenhauer, and of course, Nietzsche.
It is the deists that describe God as a mere first cause, or as Nietzsche describes, as the thinnest, emptiest concept, a mere causis sua, perpetrated as ens realissimum. The atheists, on the other hand, have already stabbed God right in his genitals.
Despite earlier thinkers' attempts to light lanterns, to reveal the hidden knowledge of God, acts like, quote,
"Detach the earth from the sun, drink up the sea, wipe away the whole horizon."
Undermine the value of God as the ultimate value. It's these deists, and more importantly the atheists, that the Madman addresses. What happens when, quote,
the holiest and the mightiest that the world has hitherto possessed
is no longer the foundation for existence, knowledge, society?
For Friedrich, the death of God is the realization that there are no transcendent values. To be transcended means to be beyond our grasp. That which is transcendent is above us in authority, and it is eternally true. When we talk about ideals, our goal is some transcendent value that we strive for, despite it being, by definition, beyond us.
But without transcendent values, we get the feeling that nothing means anything, and therefore everything is the same.
Is there still an above and a below?
The Madman asks.
Nietzsche says it more directly in his book Twilight of the Idols. What alone can our teaching be? That no one gives a human being his qualities. Not God, not society, not his parents or ancestors, not he himself. No one is accountable for existing at all, or for being constituted as he is, or for living in the circumstances and surroundings in which he lives. The fatality of his nature cannot be disentangled from the fatality of all that which has been and will be. He is not the result of a specific design, a will, a purpose. He is not the subject of an attempt to attain an ideal of man, or an ideal of happiness, or an ideal of morality. It is absurd to want to hand over his nature to some purpose or other. We invented the concept purpose. In reality, purpose is lacking.
Basically, there is nothing out there that gives a fuck. We created the concept purpose, and because we applied it to God, a being for the purposes of this video we'll all assume doesn't exist, we find the concept of purpose lacking. And with the death of God, this lack of purpose is all the more blatant. The madman questions whether the world has become colder, darker, more empty after God's death. Humanity, which clung so hard to this greatest conception of God, now plunges continuously in all directions as if straying through infinite nothingness.
With the death of God comes the death of Christian morality and the values it gave to life. Now, humanity has lost all values it once clung to. Nietzsche says in the book Beyond Good and Evil, quote, "Didn't one have to sacrifice God himself, and, from cruelty against oneself, worship the stone, stupidity, gravity, fate, the nothing? To sacrifice God for nothing?" All values have lost meaning and seem to point us towards nothing. There is no objective morality, no good or evil.
If all values are equal to nothing, if there is perfect equality in society, like so many humanists and socialists seem to desire, then there is nothing to overcome. Nietzsche calls this a modern form of nihilism, or theoretical nihilism. The death of God is the death of the highest concept, the transcendental concept. The madman asks, quote,
Shall we not ourselves have to become gods, merely to seem worthy of it?
When humans become God, they attempt to become the transcendental ground for the world. What then happens? Humanity becomes an end unto itself.
Here Nietzsche points his hammer at thinkers like Descartes and Kant that prioritize the metaphysics of a transcendental, whole, complete ego. The ego of the subject became the primary metaphysical principle and lens through which true knowledge is discovered. At the same time, 18th and 19th century thinkers increasingly saw their era as the pinnacle of human history. We're here at the final and perfect conclusion. There's nothing left to do. For instance, before the discoveries of Albert Einstein and quantum mechanics, many physicists believed there was nothing left to learn besides increasingly accurate and precise measurements.
With this thought, everything must spring from humanity.
This is the ultimate consequence of modernity and nihilism. Much like with equality, if humanity is an end, there is nothing to overcome.
Humanity then imagines the world as a living being, a machine, or uniform everywhere. Descartes believed all living things were essentially machines, even our own bodies that were separated from our egos. Finally, thinkers like Kant, Hegel, and Marx all believed that there was a teleology or purpose to the world. They postulated meta-narratives on the end goals of human civilization. Nietzsche warns us to be on our guard from such thoughts, because they presuppose an end, a telos, a grand design or meta-narrative, which again prevents overcoming.
Despite the good and godly intentions of the early figures of modernity, in murdering God and all other worlds, we were left with just the world of appearances, which we exist in. But after over 2,500 years of degrading the sensual for the spiritual, from Plato to Christianity to the modernity with the rationalists and idealists, it is just a world of mere appearances.
We can never truly be sure of anything, for there is no objective truth. The death of transcendent values leaves us with no North Star, to the point the madman wonders if we should even use the lanterns given to us by modernity.
Shall we not have to light lanterns in the morning?
These lanterns don't reveal anything anymore. They only reveal nothing. The madman ultimately throws his own lantern to the ground, extinguishing it. The madman asks us if we cannot smell the putrefaction of the divine corpse.
For even gods putrefy.
Despite being dead, the stench of God lingers evermore. Modernity is the veil to the thinkability of all beings. In the absence of God, modernity still maintains the necessities grounded in a deity through the creation of quote-unquote natural laws, natural order, belief in intelligent design, objective morality, and so on.
Like the biblical Adam of Genesis, who names all of God's creations, 18th century biologist Carl Linnaeus conquered the names of all animals through his taxonomic net, neatly organizing all life into its proper place. Linnaeus also believed that all species of life that currently existed were permanent and remained unchanged since the beginning of time. Kant, who is super fucking racist, was against race mixing because he believed nature had already reached its teleological conclusion with the races separated. Because one could only find different races on different continents with drastically different climates, Kant presupposed that nature had intended a differentiation of the races up to this point.
Nietzsche doesn't believe there is a natural order to the world, that those beliefs are just holdovers from the Christian God that continues to putrefy in modern sciences.
Modernity seeks to bend the world around itself, to create the kind of world which humanity can then kneel to.
The modern person kneels to this world and believes it is an escape from the suffering of life. They are not overcoming life, they are acquiescing to it.
Kant legit admits he can't prove through reason alone that God exists or doesn't exist, but still just throws him into his philosophy just cause, causes sewer.
The nihilism of modernity reduces all of humanity's values and beliefs to nil. Now, humanity equates all things as equally nothing, and does not strive to overcome anything. The words of Nietzsche, quote, "The general character of the world is to all eternity chaos, not by the absence of necessity, but in the sense of absence of order, structure, form, beauty, wisdom, and whatever else our aesthetic humanities are called."
There is a necessity to the cosmos, but it is a chaotic necessity. A necessity of differences that reject order, structure, essences, anything eternal or certain, and so on and so forth. A necessity that necessitates overcoming as the only real goal of existence. Differences must necessarily attempt to overcome themselves. Differences that don't overcome themselves don't exist. Nietzsche says the death of God replaces one nihilism with another. This new form of nihilism is the realization of the necessity of chaos and the deep pessimism that comes with it. It is only here that the theoretical forms of nihilism develop, where people literally believe in nothing.
Yeah, we believe in nothing.
We believe in nothing, Laboski, nothing.
And tomorrow we come back and we cut off your Johnson.
Excuse me?
I said we cut off your Johnson!
Just think about that, Lebowski.
Ah, you wiggle penis, Laboski.
Maybe we stomp on it and squish it. Yeah, Lebowski.
Man, they were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believed in nothing.
Nihilists. Fuck me.
French philosopher Gilles Deleuze says of modern nihilism that it, quote, is no longer the devaluation of life in the name of higher values, but rather the devaluation of higher values themselves.
With God dead and buried, the good and truth that rested with God is now lost. If the greatest value ever created can be overturned, then all such values can, ad infinitum. All of our successive highest values, the Enlightenment, humanism, utopias, can all be just as easily dispatched. Our values seem fated towards perpetual nothingness.
With all things Nietzsche, a perspectival methodology is necessary to decipher all the meanings behind his words. One of the things that makes Nietzsche such an incredible thinker is his ability to write things polysemically, with multiple meanings.
Let's finish off the earlier quote from Twilight of the Idols, where Nietzsche stresses there is no purpose for us to rely on. He says this not pessimistically, as a pessimistic nihilist might, but optimistically.
Quote, "One is necessary, one is a piece of faith, one belongs to the whole, one is in the whole. There exists nothing which could judge, measure, compare, condemn the whole. But nothing exists apart from the whole. That no one is any longer made accountable, that the kind of being manifested cannot be traced back to a causa prima, that the world is a unity neither as sensorium nor as spirit. This alone is a great liberation. Thus alone is the innocence of becoming restored. The concept God has hitherto been the greatest objection to existence. We deny God. In denying God, we deny accountability. Only by doing that do we redeem the world.
Contrary to his contemporaries' beliefs, the death of God is a profoundly liberating experience for Nietzsche. Yes, there are no transcendent values, no eternal truths, but those things prevented man from affirming life and existence. Humanity has the opportunity to create its own value as it sees fit, specifically values that continuously overcome chaos and therefore affirm life. The Madman says,
I have come too early. I am not yet here at the right time.
The realization of the liberation from God, a momentous occasion with the power of thunder and lightning, has still not reached most of humanity's ears. And when it does, Nietzsche hopes that it will be heard by the ears of a free thinker. For Nietzsche, there are actually many deaths of God and gods that he speaks about throughout his work. Nietzsche performs a genealogy of the different types of gods societies have constructed to then bow down to and obey. There are the deaths of many gods, polytheism in general, the death of national gods, like the God of the Old Testament. The Madman speaks of the death of the Christian God, or any omni-monotheistic deity. But the story of the Madman mainly focuses on how the death of God affects society, especially the creation of modern or theoretical nihilism. We can look at the genealogy of theocide in another video, but next time we'll focus on nihilism in all of its forms. Don't forget to subscribe and become a patron on Patreon.